It's boxy, it's sturdy, and boy is it white. It's time to take a look at the NZXT S340 mid-tower case. All right, so let's first take a tour of this case, and starting it off, you can see that the case has a very nice, clean look with a white finish with a little bit of black accenting and some really nice right angles and just a really boxy design that personally I really enjoy. Taking a look at the front panel of the case, you can see that it is flat. There's nowhere for an optical drive, just like the H440, and I think that's something that is really appealing about the look of this case, is there's nothing to break up the front image. Now, taking a look over at the side, you can see that there is a very large panel, and looking at that window, you can see the unique look of the interior of this case. And really, it's just a lot of space for something this small, with the grommetless design with this little steel bar that runs down it to separate the front and back of the case. And as you'll see, once a build is complete in here, it does a very good job of actually hiding your cables and giving you some good cable management. Taking a look at the back, you can see that you have your usual slot for your motherboard I/O, and this is an ATX compatible case. So you do have 7 PCI Express expansion slots. And then there is just an open area to the right of those, so there's no door or anything closing that open area. So some dust may get in there, but probably not too much. And then the power supply cage is the same design as used in the H440, where you actually undo these 4 screws, which stay in place even when they are unscrewed, and then you put your power supply in, slide it into the shroud, which we'll see in a minute, and you're set. And then taking a look at the other side of the case, you can see that it's just one flat white panel, but it's a very nice finish on this paint job, so it does look good. And the nice thing about this case is it's pretty much all steel construction. 90% of this case is steel, and that includes the side panels, and you can really feel it when you take them off. They feel incredibly sturdy. Taking a look at the top, this is where you have the black accenting, so you have a matte black finish to contrast the glossy white. You have an area on the top for a fan mount at 120 or 140 millimeters. And then for your front I/O, you have your usual microphone and headphone, and then 2 USB 3.0, and of course your power button and your hard drive LED. All right, taking a look at the inside of the case, the first thing you'll notice is the white bar running down the middle of the case, and that is the steel bar designed to separate the front and back of the case. So essentially, instead of grommets, you just have this area right here where all of your cables come through. And you don't really have to look at any ugly grommets or anything like that. It covers them up, and it does a pretty darn good job as well. You can see that below that you have the shroud for your power supply. Again, taking a lesson from the H440, and taking that even further, you have 2 areas to mount an SSD or a 2.5-inch mechanical drive if that's your jam. Moving in a little bit further, you can see that you have standoffs already in place for an ATX motherboard, but you can also use a micro ATX or a mini ITX board in this case. And then there are your 7 PCI Express expansion slots once again from the other side. And moving up from there, you can see that there is a 120 millimeter fan. Now, as far as drive bays are concerned in this case, you do not have any 5 1/4 inch. As I mentioned, you don't even have them internally, but you do have 2 3.5-inch that are very easily accessible, and then you do have an additional place to put one more if you put it on the very bottom. And then you also have those 2 2.5-inch that I mentioned earlier on top of the power supply shroud. Now, taking a look at the front with the panel off, you can see that you do have quite a bit of flexibility up here for a case of this size, with extremely easy access to the mounting area. There's really nothing to get in your way here, and you have a magnetic dust filter on here that actually has very strong magnets. So you pop those off, and then you have the area for being able to mount. So in the front, you can do 2 140 millimeter fans or 2 120 millimeter fans, which means that you have support for the same with the radiator. So you can do either 120, 140, or you can do a 280. The reason I say I don't bring up 240 is I'm not sure if there's a 240 around that will fit. I'll get to that when I actually get to my conclusion, but there are some clearance issues with radiators in the front of this case, and it's something that's very important to take into consideration if you're thinking about using a liquid cooling solution with the front mount on here, or even the top, because the top also allows you to do 120 or 140 millimeter radiator, but motherboard clearances are going to be an issue in a lot of cases, especially with the memory and the CPU coolers if you're using a tower cooler, because the motherboard comes very close to the top of the case just by design. So taking a look at clearances, your GPU clearance with a radiator is 334 millimeters. Your GPU clearance without a radiator is 364 millimeters. Your CPU cooler can be 161 millimeters tall, And as far as cable management goes, at the lowest point you have 17 millimeters to work with, and at the highest point you have 168 millimeters to work with. Along the bottom of the case, you've got 4 feet to help elevate it a little bit for some airflow for your power supply, and you do have a little bit of a dust filter here. It's more of a kind of a cheap mesh, actually, so it is removable, but yeah, it's a good thing this isn't something you see all the time, because it's not overly attractive and really not at the highest quality, but you know, hey, it probably gets the job done. Now, as I mentioned, this case does have a lot of steel in it. So it's using SECC steel with a mix of a very small amount of ABS plastic, which you see mostly on that front panel. As I said, these panels do feel incredibly sturdy, and I think that the paint job is really well done. I didn't see any inconsistencies with the whites. I didn't see any inconsistencies with the glossiness. And then finally, taking a look at the measurements, this case measures in at 445 millimeters high and 432 millimeters long and 200 millimeters wide. All right, so there are all of the specs and the goodness and the rundown and the spec sheet you get with it as the supply sample and all that good stuff. With that out of the way, all that business stuff, how do I really feel about this case? Well, I've got a build completed inside. I went ahead and, you know, I'm just butchering these poor budget build gaming PCs because I'm taking all the parts out of them and putting them on other cases and mixing and matching things. But I went ahead and took the components from the Intel budget gaming build using the micro ATX board from ASRock and the Intel G3250 Pentium 20th anniversary chip and put them in here and then left everything else pretty much as it was with the case. So with all that said, how was the build experience? Well, taking a look at the inside of the case, you can see the little bar that runs down the middle that instead of using grommets, they just have one big opening, and then NZXT is covered up with this nice piece of engineering, this steel bar that runs down here. And you know, when I first saw the box for this, I was like, that is a little weird. I don't know how I'm gonna feel about that when I actually open up the case. But I have to say, aesthetically, I really like it. I think it's a nice touch, it's something different. And overall, I think it does a fantastic job of doing exactly what it was designed to do. It allows you to tuck a lot of cables back there without seeing them, and you can run them anywhere. So you're not restricted to where you just have grommet holes, and then you got cables running in awkward directions. No. With this, you just run the cable exactly where you want it. There are plenty of tie-down areas on the actual back side of that bar, so it makes it really easy to get your cables exactly where you want them to go. And as you can see in this case, I had no issues with my 24-pin, I had no issues with the USB 3.0, and I was even able to run the SATA cables exactly as I wanted to. Coming up through the bottom, since this is a micro ATX board, I had a little bit of a run to make for all the motherboard connectors, as well as running a fan up to one of the fan headers. And I was like, wonder how that's gonna look. It actually turned out okay. I mean, obviously you can see the cables, but they're really straight. They ran straight down, and it's a nice clean look, and I think as long as you can keep things organized, even if they're not the most pleasant thing to look at, they blend in a little bit better, and that was the case there. Building inside the case overall was extremely easy. It's very easy to access everything in here. When you take off the side panels and the front panel, you almost kind of look at it and think, am I missing something? It seems like there should be more in this area. But there's not. It's wide open, and if you put some fans in here, I think that you're gonna have much better airflow with this case than you did maybe with the H440 even with the front, because you've got really big areas in the top and bottom here for air to come in, and then you've just got lots of space. You've got nothing blocking the flow of air. So I think you're gonna be in pretty good shape if you're trying to cool down a GPU or something like that. Now, some of the negatives about the case, I hit them almost right away, because I wanted to try to replicate the look of the build on the box. And on the box, you can see that they have a nice radiator cooler. They're using, of course, a Kraken, and they've got the tubing running exactly in the perfect world how it would run right over to your GPU. So I thought, you know what? I've got an X41 and I've got an X31. I'm gonna see if I can replicate that look, at least with the tubing that they kind of have in the picture, and see if I can make it even nearly as clean. Well, it turns out that radiator clearance is not very substantial, and that's because of that little grommet bar. It sticks out enough to actually get in the way, and when I tried to put the X41 inside this case on a front mount, it was just too tall with the fan installed, and without the fan, it's useless. So you need a thinner radiator. So I think that this case was really, specifically designed for an X60 or an X61. You could probably go with like the Corsair H110. There's a couple of other options out there, but they need to be the thin radiators. You can't go with anything thick. So like a Corsair H105 is going to be out, just like the Kraken X41 was out. I didn't try the X31, but I'm pretty sure I probably would have ran into the same issue with that as well. So I thought, okay, we'll move to the top and I'll top mount it and see how that works out. And without even putting it in, I could just look, and that wasn't going to be an option. Even a thin radiator up here is going to be a little tricky, at least with my motherboard, because the memory banks are so high up on the board, and the board comes right to the top of the case because this isn't a very large case. It's sturdy, but it's not large. So I ran into a clearance issue there. So the only option I would have really had is to back mount, which means I would have had to step down from the X41 to the X31 and do a 120 millimeter mount back here, which would have been a little cramped still, but it would have fit in my particular configuration. So because that didn't work out, I went ahead and utilized the Noctua NHU12S, which I actually had in for review, and I haven't reviewed yet, but I also have the 14S as well. So this will give me a good opportunity to kind of show off both of those different coolers in real world applications. And this is actually, even the 12S is going to be completely overkill for using a G3258, even with a really pretty decent overclock on it. It's just a very efficient cooler, and it's just the right size for this case. If it was any taller, we'd have some clearance issues. So I think going with the 12 instead of the 14 was the way to go. And it does, you know, some people, you look at that Noctua fan and you're like, oh, the case looks so good. It's black and white everywhere. You know, there's a little bit of blue because of the ASRock motherboard. And then there's like, what is that with the Noctua fan? I don't mind the look of the Noctua fans. To me, I think that they kind of speak quality, but that's because I'm a Noctua fanboy. However, you know, you could put a different fan on this cooler if you wanted to or something, but you know, to each their own. There's plenty of options out there, such as a Hyper 212 Evo, you know, or the plethora of other things that you can install on a board like this. So just know going into it that if you're going to be doing a liquid-cooled solution in here, your options are limited. So make sure you check the clearance. You have to have a thin radiator, or this little bar is going to get in the way. Other than that, I didn't have any real issues. Taking a look at the back, you can actually see the cable management was very easy, and I think I did a pretty darn good job of it. I purposely used a non-modular power supply for this build because I wanted to see how well I could deal with all of the extra cables that I wasn't going to need, especially without having an optical drive installed and with everything being at the bottom. So I didn't have any like extra cables running anywhere to, you know, kind of use them up. Everything was down there in the same spot. But the power supply shroud gives plenty of room. Even with the two 3.5-inch drive bays at the front area, I was still able to tuck everything away nicely, and I was able to tie everything down in a way that made sense and made my runs very easy. And the best part of all, and the thing that makes me just, with the H440, the back panel. There's no foam in this case, which makes all the difference in the world. Yes, it's going to be louder because you don't have the sound dampening foam, but you can get the back panel on without having to put on your wrestling outfit and get the case down and it just slides on nicely. And I actually was so pleased with it, I took video of me popping it on. Same goes for the front panel, but that was never really an issue with any case I've dealt with, unless you put way too big of a cooler in there. But as long as you take some time on your cable management, being able to get that back panel on this case, super easy, and that's always nice, and you know, especially for someone like me who's constantly taking things in and out of my systems. When it's a real struggle to get something in or out, that's or on or off, that's always a negative. And in this case, no problems. Now, it's not a light case by any means. For as small as it is, this thing has some heft. It's almost all steel, which is great. Unless you're going to be carrying it around a lot. For me, I don't move my cases around. If I was going to do a LAN party case or something like that, I would do you know, a mini ITX build, and I would do a case that's purpose-built for being moved around. This one, I just like it. It's sturdy. If you got it on the floor, it's going to stay in place. If your cat rubs on it, it's not going to tip over. If it's on your desk, it's going to feel good. You know, everything is nice and solid. There's a little bit of rattle in the front panel, and a little bit of a gap there, but that's just simply because of the general design. It's going to be almost impossible to be able to make this seamless right here, just the way that it comes together. So, you know, that's a little bothersome, but other than that, it's an incredibly sturdy case. It's a little wobbly because my island actually isn't level, so it's making it move around a little bit, but on a flat surface, it's just fine. It's a very solid feeling case, so if you want something that's lighter, you're probably going to want to look elsewhere, but this one has some heft to it. Now there is no integrated fan controller on here, so you do have to rely on your motherboard's fan headers. If you're going to put a lot of fans in this system, that may be a problem depending on what motherboard you go with. Now for me, a lot of the times I use ASUS motherboards, so I don't have any issue because there's A, usually enough fan headers, B, they're PWM and you can split them into 2 or sometimes 3 fans per header, and C, I find that Fan Expert is a very nice fan control piece of software, so I don't get too worked up when I have an ASUS board. However, with the ASRock board I have in here, that's a different story. I have 3 fan headers. Only 2 of them are really in a spot that makes sense. Using the third one requires running a cable or a wire over to the middle of the motherboard, so the back fan is the most likely candidate for that, but that's still just, aesthetically to me, I don't like it. It's something that you have to deal with if you want to use the 3 fan headers. So you do have another option. NZXT sent me the Grid Plus. This thing's dusty because they sent it to me a while ago, but it is a fan controller. So how many does this have on it? And let me take a quick look here. It looks like this has 6 fan headers, so this is going to give you a lot of flexibility, and this is something that I'm going to do a review on, and then I'll actually probably use it as an example in this case because I would like to put 2 additional fans in the front. So I'm going to have 2 in the front, 1 in the top, 1 in the rear. That's 4 fans. Unless I split one of my fan headers or 2 of my fan headers, I'm going to be in trouble unless I run to that third one, which I don't want to. So this, with a little bit of extra space I have in the back of the S340, is going to be perfect. You can pretty much tuck it anywhere, and then you can utilize the, I think it is called the CAM. I always mess it up. You can utilize the CAM software, which is the same software that actually controls the Kraken CPU coolers. So that's nice because if you have one of those installed, which unfortunately I couldn't fit in here. I do have an X61, but it's in the system I use every day and I'm not taking it out because I like it too much. But if you had a Kraken installed in here and you put one of these in, or in any computer, it's going to be nice because one piece of software is going to be your fan control and your control for your radiator, and then your general system monitor and system information for temps and things of that nature. So all that said, for 70 bucks, I think this is a really nice case option. I like clean cases, I like white cases, so I'm really glad that's the review sample they sent me instead of the black. And I think that you're not going to be disappointed for $70 if you're doing a mid-range, a higher-end budget build to a mid-range build. I think you're going to be really happy with this case. I forget the person's name, but I'll put it along the bottom. But I have a Twitter follower who actually sent me a photo of one of the cases that's been modded with artwork. And because of all the flat surface area, it's a great case for that if you want to put some artwork. So I've got that up on the screen right now. And as you can see, it's pretty impressive. I don't have that much skill, so that's definitely not happening to this case, not unless somebody else does it. So I highly recommend this case. If you're into steel cases that are a little bit heavier, and really clean design, you don't need an optical drive, I think this is a really good option. I was really intrigued with it from the first time I saw the press release for it, and it really didn't disappoint, and I'm going to actually probably make this my secondary system. I'm going to keep it around. I really like it. It's going to replace the Core 1100. So for now, it has a place on my secondary desk. So you know the drill. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and click on that subscribe button. You can also follow me on Twitter over at techuploaded. I am on Facebook at facebook.com/techuploaded. And finally, you can hit me up on the Gmail at techuploaded@gmail.com. So don't be a stranger. Check back soon.